there are all kinds of centrifugal forces at work. So how confident are you that 2014 is going to leave behind it a representative, united, stable, sustainable Afghan government that's credible and that somehow can win the confidence of the Afghan people? And then what do you want from your neighbors?
Okay. Thank you very much. I thank the management of the conference, especially Qadri, for inviting me. I would like to give the Afghan perspective and then briefly touch upon the centrality of Pakistani role especially. As we are approaching 2014, there are a series of assumptions and rough calculations. And these assumptions are that the current gains by the NATO and ANSF will be sustained. When NATO draws down nearly 90% of its troops, ANSF with some mentors from NATO countries, particularly United States, will hold the Taliban at bay. Whereas with maximum NATO presence and with maximum ANSF, the Taliban have not been kept at bay. They managed to infiltrate our big cities. And the hold period, the hold stage of NATO strategy, clear, hold, build, we are in the hold, but it's not a perfect hold, and it's not near perfect hold. Assumption 2 is by signing SPA, Strategic Partnership Agreement, NATO members, particularly the United States, will keep the bad hand of some of our bad neighbors again away from Afghanistan. The question is, with massive incentives post 9/11, with massive international pressure, if not very public pressure, and with massive military intervention in Afghanistan, these bad hands were not kept away. What gives us the confidence that with less resources, less pressure, less incentive, these hands will be kept away? And third assumption is President Karzai will withdraw in 2014, parallel with withdrawal of US troops, and he will pave the way for a smooth, legal, political transition. And until then, he will bring a measure of reform which will pave the way for a credible Afghan election. Again, if we did not have a highly credible Afghan election in 2009 with massive international attention, and if with 2 years left to 2014 and no visible pressure on President Karzai to bring reform, what gives the West confidence that the elections in 2014 will be better than 2009 and the security will be better than 2009? Assumption 4 is the sanctuaries of Taliban in Pakistan and maintenance of these sanctuaries, i.e. Quetta Shura and Miram Shah Shura and Gulbuddin Hekmatyar's headquarters in Peshawar, will become unsustainable for Pakistan, and Pakistanis will eventually push these groups into negotiations with President Karzai. Again, the question is, if under this big pressure over the past 10 years, Pakistan did not push them to negotiate and play a scripted role in the Afghan politics, why would Pakistan then push them to negotiate with a weaker Afghan state? When you speak to generals and diplomats in Kabul and say, why Pakistan helped the Taliban, they say, it's an insurance policy for Pakistan because they kept these forces for rainy day. And for Pakistani establishment, the rainy day is 2014. And until then, they will not encourage the Taliban to enter into any meaningful negotiations. The question again is, if Taliban is a Pakistani proxy, what is the Pakistani Taliban? that I have a lot of evidence to suggest they are totally two different groups. I won't elaborate that now. Then the fifth assumption is that under the military pressure of the last 10 years, the Taliban are no longer representing militant extremism. This is a fundamental mistake. Moderate Taliban is an invention of the current Western narrative in order to justify withdrawal of troops, reduction of the agenda, and reduction of the attention. By offering to negotiate with the Taliban, the so-called Qatar process, actually we have offered recognition, legitimacy, and a space for militant extremism. This is in total contrast and contradiction to the macro objectives of post-9/11 intervention, because the post-9/11 objective was deny militant extremism a space, legitimacy, and ability to govern again. So when you negotiate with them and they still continue to be more violent and more savvy than before, you provide them recognition. Unfortunately, that damage is done, and it's a massive damage to the credibility of the mission. Now, with that said, I am not arguing that let us keep the current level of the NATO forces, let us increase the current number of NATO forces and find a military solution to the problem. That's not my argument. What I say is, yes, the current level of the forces is not sustainable. So what will keep us at ease to have a functioning government and the ability to keep the insurgents at bay is the following. A, we should not forget the big objectives. The big objective was do not allow militant extremism to come to power through the barrel of the gun. And we are not sure with the current narrative, with current soft outreach, there will be any incentive for the Taliban to lay down their arms. Two, the situation is such that Pakistan claims that they are not part of the game. I think they were central part of the game for 11 years. The Afghan army from 2002 to 2007 was kept very, very small in order to appease the Pakistanis. I remember specifically US military stopped constructing an airstrip in Paktika province under the pressure of the Pakistanis. The Afghan army was defined as an army to intervene in emergency situations, rippling or stopping ethnic rebellion and tribal dissent. There was no mention of protecting Afghan borders. It was specifically to keep Pakistan happy and to insist on centrality of Pakistan's role as a NATO ally in the region. I am very, very glad that the Pakistani government is now sensing and feeling part of the heat. If they felt this heat about 8 years ago, they would have changed their behavior a little bit by now. So, where are we heading? Again, I am not saying that the current level of military support should be there. I say the application of the force and the application of the resources should be done in a much smarter way. Afghan force, ANSF is very big compared to the economy of Afghanistan and our situation, but it's not a smart force. They have bad weapons, they have bad equipment, they are totally, totally dependent on United States for ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And plus, they are not trained good enough to be watchful of our eastern and southern borders. What will be the ideal situation, what I call a dream scenario? The dream scenario will be bring a measure of reform before 2014 that the next elections will produce and bring into scene a partner for the international friends of Afghanistan and gain the confidence of the Afghan people back into the democratic process. Whether the Taliban speak to us or not, if we have that type of a situation, the Afghan government can live with a low-intensity insurgency. But if we continue the situation muddled through, where there is no reform, no breakthrough in talks with the Taliban, where there is no visible and tangible pressure on Pakistan to close down the sanctuaries, everything we say about 2014 is largely, I am afraid to say, a self-deceptive and self-deceptive narrative. Thank you.